Trunks simps even harder for Mai. But along the way, he reminded us that he's actually an NBA prospect. And this chapter is the perfect definition of filler, as it had great humor, a great utilization of characters, and it was extremely creative. But where do we begin by discussing this chapter? Well, the first thing that we have to discuss directly is the character of Bra, which is a rather unique way to open up this video. And to be specific, it's very easy to appreciate the direction that they took with Bra in Dragon Ball Super, since obviously this is the first real time that we've actually seen her since the time skip, as she's older now, whereas the last time we saw her she was basically a newborn. And to be specific, the direction that they took with Bra's character is that she's basically a super genius like Bulma, whereas in contrast to that, they made Trunks a complete idiot. Now, at the end of Dragon Ball Z, I mean, we didn't really know anything about Bra at all, because basically she was basically just a toddler, so there was nothing we could really say. And in Dragon Ball GT, it would probably be completely inappropriate for modern standards to have her the way that she was, considering the fact that she was an 8-year-old girl that dressed in a very, rather say, promiscuous way for an 8-year-old. But despite all of that, she basically had the personality of just being a spoiled, pampered brat with no real fighting ability and not being a genius either. There were a few scenes that we saw throughout Dragon Ball GT where she was basically just powering up Baby, and maybe that might imply that maybe she has innate abilities, considering the fact that she's actually half Saiyan, whereas Pan is a quarter Saiyan, so she would think that she obviously has fighting potential. But other than that, she definitely did not have the character that she has now, which I definitely think sets up seeds for the future, considering the fact that at some point Bulma's gonna die, and obviously Bra can replace her in the future, which obviously will go in that direction, where Trunks is basically the fighter and Bra is basically the genius. And of course, this is obviously a huge contrast to the Trunks that we originally saw in Dragon Ball GT, who was basically the CEO of Capsule Corp, and also in the end of Dragon Ball Z and throughout Dragon Ball, where he basically has always been utilizing technology, so you would think he was at least above average in intelligence, or was at least moderately adept. Now, another thing that this manga chapter did is that it explained why Mai is going to high school again. And basically, Bulma figured out that because Mai is physically around the same age as Trunks, that it would make sense for her to go to high school because it would be too suspicious if she didn't, considering her age. And when you actually think about it, it's pretty funny considering the fact that Mai is a middle-aged woman going to school with a bunch of high schoolers. Which is hilarious because you could just imagine putting yourself in that situation. I mean, I'm in my 20s and I could just imagine how awkward it would be going back to high school with, you know, teenagers again, because then when you're like, hey, am I allowed to find that girl attractive because she's like a teenager, but I'm also a teenager too, but technically I'm really like a 20-something-year-old in a high schooler body. Where do we draw the line between this is just a little too weird? I mean, obviously we're looking too deeply into this, but you could just imagine from, you know, a mental point of view how awkward it could be for Mai to go back to high school. And obviously a lot of you guys were commenting on the last video talking about how gross this is. And when you think about it deeply, it definitely is gross, but that's why we always say ignorance is sometimes bliss. But despite all of this though, we also meet two new characters. One of them is Scale and the other one is Beta. Now, Beta directly bears a resemblance to multiple characters throughout Dragon Ball history. The first would be General Blue, going all back to the days of Dragon Ball. The other would be Karoni, who was Mr. Satan's lackey during the Cell games. The other would be the character of Jewel, going back to the World Tournament, obviously during the Buu arc, when he was, you know, introduced around the time of Killa. And also we have the other character that he also bears some resemblance to of Barry Khan that we saw in Dragon Ball Super, and we also saw originally in Dragon Ball Z briefly. But out of all of these characters, there's one character that he bears the strongest resemblance to, and that is the character of Sharpener. And to be specific, they completely paralleled the character of Sharpener to Beta directly, as obviously Sharpener was originally testing Gohan during the Buu arc, or shall I say the pre-Buu arc, or the Great Saiyaman arc, when he was basically challenging him to a baseball game. And in this specific situation, they obviously changed this to Trunks competing against Beta in a basketball game. So they basically just changed the sport. And all of this brings up a bigger question to our characters when it comes to playing sports, as to why more Dragon Ball characters don't actually play sports. We obviously saw this with Yamcha, who's obviously a baseball player, which was demonstrated earlier, but we also have seen in an alternate series, The Incredibles, that there was a conversation about supers using superpowers, as obviously Dash would be extremely good at sports had he actually used his powers, but at the same time it would be completely unfair, but it would be a hack to allow him to have an athletic advantage over the other competitors in his life. And with all of that, it kind of makes you wonder, why wouldn't a character like Krillin, who, works a normal job as a police officer, wouldn't think about participating in sports when he could obviously make a lot more money and he could clearly have a huge advantage despite his lack of size. But ultimately we find out later on that this character, Beta, directly works for Dr. Hito and he is not a human. I also have to admit here, from a personal point of view, I really enjoyed seeing the basketball scene because, contrary to what you see me upload here, I'm actually an even bigger basketball fan than I am a Dragon Ball fan. Like, basketball's been my favorite sport since I was like 8 or 9. And, seeing it being put into, Dragon Ball as opposed to baseball, and then also seeing another scene later on where we see a football being in this manga chapter as well was definitely an interesting thing to obviously appeal to the Americanized audience, as Toyotaro also said that he wanted to Americanize the high school that the characters were going to. But overall, one of the best things about this manga chapter was really the whole game of cat and mouse that we saw. This chess match between Trunks and Beta is basically, Beta was sent there from Dr. Hito to essentially just figure out who stole the disc, and is basically trying to extract information, and along the way he's trying to get Trunks to expose himself as to being this superpowered character, and Trunks is doing everything in his power to basically remain normal in the most human-like way possible. And there are multiple scenes that we saw of like him throwing the football, him throwing food, outperforming him at math, and obviously Trunks is shown to be extremely dumb during all of this, which they definitely hinted at in Dragon Ball Super 2 when Trunks was struggling to do math when he was taking courses with the Pilaf gang. So even going back to Dragon Ball Super, they were hinting from the very beginning that Trunks is not the smartest. But unfortunately for Goten, as always, the show completely gets taken over by Trunks, as Goten was fighting against Beta, and Trunks just jumps in to obviously just remind Goten that he's always going to be a side character that has absolutely no substance, and he's only there to basically create mistakes and be the backup guy because it's all about Trunks and all of the other characters. But going back to the actual battle, this manga chapter was very effective by creating tension in this situation, because obviously Goten and Trunks are strong enough to just dust Beta from existence, but the tension that they created wasn't the actual battle itself, but it was the weaker characters that were essentially around, as Beta was firing missiles at a bunch of kids, so I guess you could technically say it was a school shooting, technically, and you could also say that, obviously because of Mai being in trouble and Trunks having to, conceal his identity, I feel like they managed to do an effective job at scaling down the tension to our characters trying to not only protect their identity, but also trying to protect the weaker characters who obviously are in danger from this threat, even if the threat isn't that powerful itself. And we get it that this manga chapter was designed to be, comedic and have slice of life and humor, but man, did they make Mai so stupid. At the end of all of this, when Trunks saves Mai as the damsel of distress, she has a brief moment where she says Trunks, as she obviously recognizes him, but at the end she just goes back into thinking that X1 is a totally different person. And the problem with this is that it shows absolutely no respect for Mai's intelligence, even though Mai is older than Bulma. Technically, even though she's physically not. Mai obviously knows who Trunks and Goten are, and they are one of the few strong people on the planet, so just by nature of being able to do super powerful things, immediately puts you into an extremely small bracket of potential characters on the planet, considering the fact that there aren't that many people on Earth that are that strong. And obviously Mai basically knows all of the people on the planet that are basically abnormally powerful. But then when you factor in that Trunks mysteriously leaves as soon as Beta causes trouble, then X1 mysteriously leaves as soon as Beta is defeated, then he also calls Mai by her name, and he has the same exact scarf. It's also considering the fact that, you know, Trunks has the same voice. Are you really that stupid? Now, I get it, you know, it's trying to tie everything back into, you know, the whole comedic gag of you never get what you want in the end, you never get the girl that you want in the end. Trunks is always going to be the infinite simp, and this is very well written and exciting in a very Toriyama-esque way. The chapter could have ended better if Mai decided to, like, keep a secret between her and Trunks, and then obviously she grows attraction towards him, and then this could develop. But obviously, it seems like he's just going to be that perpetual simp that she has no respect for until eventually he breaks out of his shell and becomes the future Trunks that she wants him to be.